It was years ago, but the memory still sits with me like it happened yesterday. I had believed my life was already decided, that the path in front of me would never change, no matter how much pain I carried. I was a wife who had learned to stay quiet, to accept less, and to tell herself that survival was the same thing as living. I had no idea that losing everything would become the beginning of something far greater than I ever imagined. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you are watching from. Before everything broke apart, my life looked quiet and ordinary from the outside. I believed marriage was supposed to feel steady, not exciting, not full of dreams, just safe enough to last. I woke up every morning in the same small apartment, made coffee the same way, and cleaned the same counters that never seemed to stay clean for long. I cooked simple meals, folded laundry carefully, and kept my voice low so I would not cause problems. I told myself this was what grown women did. They endured, they adjusted, they stayed quiet and grateful for what they had. My husband was not cruel every day. Most days he was distant, busy, and tired. I learned to read his moods and stay out of his way when his shoulders were tense or his jaw was tight. I believed love meant patience, and that patience meant silence. I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed helpful enough, and asked for nothing, things would stay calm. Calm felt like safety to me back then. I told myself I did not need more. I told myself dreams were for younger women or braver women. I had once wanted to finish school, to learn more, to work in something that used my mind instead of only my hands. But those thoughts felt selfish once I became a wife. Whenever they surfaced, I pushed them away. I said I was being practical. I said this was real life. I said stability mattered more than happiness. Our home was small, but I kept it neat. I believed that if the house was peaceful, the marriage would be too. I cooked his favorite foods and learned which days to stay extra quiet. When he spoke about money, I listened but never questioned. When he made decisions, I nodded. I trusted him because trusting felt easier than doubting. Doubting would have required strength I did not think I had. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. Neighbors saw a couple who kept to themselves. Family saw a woman who did not complain. Even I thought I was doing well enough. I had convinced myself that silence was maturity and that endurance was loyalty. I did not realize how much of myself I was giving up piece by piece. There were small signs I ignored. Moments when he spoke to me like I was beneath him. Times when my opinions were dismissed with a look or a sigh. I noticed how he talked proudly about other people's success, but never asked what I wanted for myself. Still, I stayed. I told myself marriage was not about being seen. It was about holding things together. I believed that if I stayed useful, I would stay needed. I believed that being quiet made me valuable. I believed that love would protect me if I just waited long enough. Those beliefs kept me still when I should have moved, and silent when I should have spoken. That morning, before everything changed, I cleaned the kitchen and planned dinner like always. I had no idea that my entire life was already being measured, judged, and prepared for removal. I did not know that silence had already taught him I would accept anything. At that moment, I still believed staying quiet was enough to survive. The day everything fell apart did not begin with shouting or anger. It began like any other ordinary day, which is what made it so hard to understand at first. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee and toast. The light coming through the window looked the same as it always did. Nothing warned me that this was the last morning I would stand in that room as someone's wife. My husband moved around the kitchen in a way that felt different. Not rushed, not angry, just distant and deliberate, like a man who had already made a decision and was only waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. He did not look at me much. He checked his phone, opened a cabinet, then closed it again without taking anything. His jacket was hanging by the door, already packed with his wallet and keys inside. something he never did unless he was leaving for work. But it was not a work day. I tried to speak casually, asking about dinner plans, about the weather, about nothing important. He answered with short words that went nowhere. The silence between us grew heavier, stretching across the small kitchen like a wall slowly being built. I felt something tightening in my chest, but I told myself I was imagining it. I had spent years explaining away discomfort. This felt no different. Then he sat down at the table, not to eat, but to wait. His posture was stiff. His hands rested flat on the surface, palms down, like he was steadying himself. I stood across from him, wiping the same spot on the counter over and over, unsure why my hands would not stop moving. That was when I noticed his suitcase near the door, not tucked away, not hidden, standing upright, ready. There was no explosion, no loud fight, no tears yet, just words delivered calmly, as if he were explaining a change in schedule or a business arrangement. He spoke about practicality, about moving on, about how things were no longer working. Each sentence felt rehearsed, polished, practiced somewhere far away from me. I realized in that moment that this conversation had already happened in his mind many times. I was only hearing it now. He talked about money as if it were the main concern, about responsibility, about how I was no longer an investment worth maintaining. He said it without cruelty in his voice, which somehow made it worse. There was no emotion, no regret, no struggle, just certainty. I understood then that he had already left me long before that morning. I had simply been living beside someone who was already gone. I tried to respond, but my words came out slow and weak. I asked questions that did not matter anymore. I asked if we could talk later, if we could take time, if this was sudden. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply repeated that the decision was final. That calmness shattered something inside me. I had always believed anger was the worst sign of danger. I was wrong. Indifference was far worse. When he stood up, it felt like the room shifted. He lifted his suitcase, walked to the door, and opened it without looking back. I followed him a few steps, not to stop him, but because my body had not yet caught up to reality. I watched him step outside like he was leaving for an errand. The door closed behind him with a soft click that echoed louder than any scream. I stood there alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the life I thought was stable. The chair he sat on was still warm. His coffee cup was half full. Everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing belonged to me anymore. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was final. That was when I understood something important. This was not a fight. This was a removal. I was not being argued with. I was being replaced. And the calm way it happened told me I had never truly been seen as a partner. I had been a convenience, a background presence, something easy to walk away from. In that quiet kitchen, with no one watching, the foundation of my life cracked open. I did not cry yet. I did not panic. I simply stood there, realizing that the safety I thought I had was never real. And once that truth settled in, there was no way to pretend otherwise. What ended my marriage was not the packed suitcase or the closed door. It was one sentence, a short sentence, spoken without anger, without hesitation, without emotion. It landed heavier than shouting ever could. In that moment, I understood that my place in his life had already been erased. I was not being left behind by mistake. I was being removed on purpose. He said I was no longer his responsibility, not his partner, not his concern, just something he was done carrying. Those words did not rush out. They were delivered slowly, carefully, as if he wanted them to sound reasonable, as if cutting someone loose after years together could be explained like a simple rule. That sentence did not only end our marriage, it rewrote every memory I had of it. I stood there trying to understand how 10 years could be reduced to something so small. I thought about the early days when we struggled together, when we counted every dollar, when we promised to build something steady. I remembered believing that loyalty meant staying, even when it was hard. I had held on to that belief like a lifeline, and now I saw how one-sided it had always been. When he said those words, there was no apology, no pause to see how I reacted, no sign that he questioned himself. It was clear he had already justified everything in his own mind. I was simply being informed. That realization cut deeper than the rejection itself. It told me that my feelings had not been part of the decision at all. I felt my body react before my mind did. My hands went cold. My chest tightened. My thoughts slowed down, like they were moving through thick water. I wanted to ask him how he could say that. I wanted to remind him of the years I supported him, the sacrifices I made quietly, the plans I put aside so he could move forward. But something stopped me. A voice inside said that explanations would change nothing. He was already gone. He did not look back to see if I was okay. He did not ask where I would go or how I would manage. That silence answered every question I did not ask. I realized then that love, for him, had always been conditional, as long as I was useful, manageable, convenient. The moment I became inconvenient, I became disposable. The door closing behind him felt final, but the sentence echoed louder in my head. You are not my responsibility anymore. It replayed over and over as I stood alone. It followed me as I walked through the apartment, touching the furniture we bought together, the curtains I chose, the dishes I washed every night. Suddenly, none of it felt shared. It felt like evidence of how invisible I had become. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wall. I did not cry right away. I felt numb, like my emotions had stepped back to protect me from collapsing. That numbness scared me more than tears would have. It meant something had broken so deeply that it could not react normally anymore. As the hours passed, the weight of that sentence settled in. It was not just a rejection of me as a wife. It was a rejection of my worth. It suggested that everything I gave had been measured and found lacking. That I had failed some unspoken test I was never told about. That realization was painful, but it was also clarifying. I saw with uncomfortable clarity how often I had made myself smaller to keep peace, how often I accepted less because I thought that was the price of stability. I had mistaken endurance for love. That sentence forced me to confront a truth I had avoided for years. Staying quiet had not protected me, it had erased me. By the time night fell, something inside me shifted. I was still hurt, still shocked, still unsure of what came next. But I knew one thing clearly. Whatever life I built from this moment on could not be based on begging to be chosen. If I was no longer someone's responsibility, then I would become my own. And that understanding, painful as it was, marked the true end of my old life. After the door closed behind him, my mind did not rush forward. It went backward. It returned to the beginning, to all the moments that explained why I stayed longer than I should have. I did not endure because I was weak. I endured because I believed in promises. I endured because I thought loyalty had value. I endured because I was raised to believe that holding a family together was worth personal loss. I remembered the first year of our marriage, when money was tight and hope was high. I had dreams then, real ones. I wanted to continue my education, to build a career that belonged to me. But when opportunities came up, there was always a reason to delay. He needed support. His work was unstable. His stress was heavy. I told myself there would be time later. Later became never. I remembered sitting at the table late at night, filling out school forms, then quietly pushing them aside when he walked in tired. I did not want to add pressure. I told myself love meant sacrifice. I believed that if I invested enough of myself into his future, mine would somehow be included. That belief kept me patient even when I felt myself shrinking. When his family needed help, I stepped in without question. I hosted gatherings. I listened to complaints. I adjusted my life around expectations that were never discussed openly but were always enforced. I learned to read moods, to smooth tension before it turned into conflict. I became very good at making things easier for everyone else. Each time I compromised, I told myself it was temporary. Each time I stayed silent, I told myself it was strength. I did not realize that silence, when repeated long enough, becomes permission. Permission for others to decide your value for you. Permission for your needs to be treated as optional. I also remembered the moments when I almost spoke up, times when I felt overlooked, dismissed, minimized. There were nights when I lay awake wondering if this was all my life would be. But then morning would come, and routine would take over. Bills to pay, meals to cook, responsibilities that did not pause for doubt. Endurance became automatic. I endured because leaving felt like failure. I endured because I was afraid of starting over. I endured because I believed marriage was something you fixed by trying harder, not something you questioned. That belief was reinforced by everyone around me. Be patient, be practical, be grateful. Those words followed me everywhere. What I did not see back then was how uneven the balance had become. I gave time, energy, support, and emotional labor without limits. In return, I received stability, but not partnership, security, but not respect. Over time, I stopped asking myself if I was happy. I only asked if things were calm. Looking back, I see how carefully I trained myself to accept less. I convinced myself that wanting more was selfish, that expecting fairness was unrealistic, that love meant adjusting endlessly. I wore endurance like a badge of honor, not realizing it was slowly erasing my identity. When he finally said I was no longer his responsibility, it felt sudden, but it was not. That sentence was built on years of quiet imbalance, years where my contributions were invisible because they were expected, years where my dreams were postponed until they no longer mattered to anyone but me. That realization hurt deeply, but it also freed me from self-blame. I stopped asking what I did wrong. I started understanding what I gave up. I did not endure because I was foolish. I endured because I was loyal in a world that rewarded convenience more than commitment. That night, sitting alone, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I had been carrying the marriage long before he walked away from it, and now that it was over, the weight I felt was not just loss. It was exhaustion lifting. For the first time in years, my life was empty of expectations that were never returned. The days after I was forced out blurred together. I did not wake up with plans anymore. I woke up with questions. Where would I sleep tonight? How long could I stretch the small amount of cash I had left? How much dignity could I keep while asking for help? I moved through spaces meant for people who had nowhere else to go, learning quickly how invisible a person becomes once they stop belonging to a home. Shelters were loud, crowded, and strict. Privacy disappeared. Pride followed soon after. I learned to carry everything I owned in one worn bag and to guard it closely, even while sleeping. Each day felt like a test of endurance. Lines for food, lines for paperwork, lines for a chance at a bed. I kept my head down and my words few. I was not looking for attention. I was looking for survival. At my age, starting over felt unreal, almost cruel. I had spent decades building a life that vanished in a single night, and now I was learning the rules of a world that does not slow down for grief. It was during one of those long afternoons that I noticed the boy. He was sitting near the edge of the room, knees pulled close, jacket too thin for the season. He did not speak much. He watched everything. His eyes were alert in a way that came from learning not to trust easily. He reminded me of fear I recognized, the kind that settles deep when you realize no one is coming to save you. I did not approach him at first. I had learned that people in survival mode protect their space, but over time, I noticed small things. He always waited until everyone else had eaten before stepping forward. He folded his hands tightly when volunteers spoke. He never asked for seconds, even when he was clearly hungry. Those details stayed with me. One evening, I sat across from him by chance. I had a small portion of food, barely enough, but more than I could finish. I pushed part of it toward him without making it a gesture. No announcement, no expectation, just sharing space. He hesitated, then accepted quietly. That moment did not feel dramatic. It felt necessary. From then on, we existed near each other, not attached, not dependent, just aware. I learned he had no family left that would take him in. I learned he had moved through places faster than he could process, learning early that stability was temporary. He did not complain. He did not ask for sympathy. That restraint spoke louder than words. As my own situation grew more uncertain, something unexpected happened inside me. Instead of feeling smaller, I felt focused. Caring about someone else gave my days structure again. It reminded me that even without a home, I still had purpose. I still had choices. I still had the ability to protect, even in small ways. I began to make decisions differently. Instead of asking how little I needed to survive, I asked what was right. I started looking into resources not just for myself, but for him too. School programs, food assistance, legal information. The work was slow and often frustrating, but it gave direction to days that would otherwise collapse into waiting. The unexpected truth was this: helping him did not drain me, it strengthened me. In a life stripped down to basics, generosity became clarity. I was reminded of who I had always been before fear taught me to shrink. I was someone who built, not someone who disappeared. The choice to move forward together was not made in a single moment. It formed gradually through shared struggle and mutual respect. I did not see myself as rescuing him. I saw us stabilizing each other. In the middle of loss, something solid began to grow. I did not know then where this path would lead. I only knew that walking it alone felt impossible, and walking it with purpose felt right. In a world that had taken everything familiar from me, this unexpected connection gave me back something essential: direction, strength, and the quiet understanding that even at my lowest, I was still capable of choosing love over despair. The bond between us did not arrive suddenly. It formed slowly, in pieces, built through ordinary days and shared silence. There were no big promises and no dramatic moments. There was just consistency. I showed up. He noticed. That was how it began. After so much loss, I had learned not to expect loyalty from words. I trusted actions instead. He did the same. When I finally moved out of the shelter into a small room I could barely afford, he helped carry my bag without being asked. It was a small thing, but it mattered. We cooked simple meals together. We shared what little we had without counting who gave more. I learned his habits, his fears, and the way he tensed when voices got loud. He learned mine too. We both carried damage, but neither of us tried to control the other. At night, when the world went quiet, he would sit at the table doing homework with full focus, as if effort alone could build safety. I watched him closely. I saw intelligence, but more than that, I saw discipline. The kind that comes from knowing no one else will catch you if you fall. I recognized that look. I had worn it myself for years. He never called me anything at first. Not mom, not guardian, just my name. I respected that. Trust cannot be rushed. Over time, he began asking questions. Not about my past marriage, not about pain, about how to plan, how to prepare, how to avoid needing anyone. I answered honestly. I told him strength came from learning, not hiding. I told him independence did not mean isolation. I told him that needing someone did not make you weak. The paperwork took months, forms, interviews, checks, doubts. Every step tested my patience and my resolve. People questioned my ability, my age, my stability. I did not argue. I provided proof. I showed consistency. I did not ask for sympathy. I asked for fairness. Slowly, doors opened. When the adoption was finalized, nothing magical happened. There were no cheers, no celebration, just a quiet acknowledgement that we belonged to each other in a way that could not be undone. That night, we ate dinner at the same small table we always used. But something felt different, not lighter, stronger. Life did not suddenly become easy. We still struggled. Bills were tight, days were long. But there was rhythm now. There was accountability. There was a shared future, even if it was unclear. We woke up with purpose. We went to sleep knowing someone else depended on us. I learned to see myself again through his eyes, not as someone discarded, not as someone who failed, but as someone who chose responsibility when walking away would have been easier. That reflection rebuilt something inside me that had been broken quietly for years. He began to thrive, slowly at first, then steadily. He took school seriously, not for praise, but for control over his future. I supported him in every way I could, not by pushing, by believing, by showing up at meetings, by listening, by reminding him that setbacks did not define him. In return, he protected me in his own way. He checked locks at night. He asked where I was going and when I would return. He made plans that included me without hesitation. He did not treat me as temporary. That mattered more than words. The bond we built was not based on rescue. It was based on respect. We did not save each other dramatically. We stabilized each other quietly. In a world that had taken so much, we built something that could not be easily broken. By the time years passed, I no longer measured my life by what I had lost. I measured it by what I had chosen to keep: love, purpose, direction, and the knowledge that family is not always who you start with. Sometimes it is who you build with, one steady day at a time. The years that followed were not dramatic. There were no sudden turns, no moments where everything changed overnight. Instead, life moved forward in small, steady steps. That was how real growth happened for us. Quietly, without witnesses, without applause. We focused on survival first, then stability, and only later did we allow ourselves to think about progress. I worked wherever I could, cleaning jobs, kitchen shifts, night work when needed. I did not complain because complaining would not pay rent or keep the lights on. I learned to budget carefully. I wrote every expense down. I planned weeks ahead. There was comfort in control, even when money was short. I taught him the same habits, not out of fear, but out of preparation. He treated school like a responsibility, not an obligation. He studied early in the mornings and late at night. He did not waste time. He asked questions. He read beyond what was assigned. I saw how his mind worked. He was not chasing grades. He was chasing understanding. That kind of focus does not come from pressure. It comes from knowing what it feels like to have nothing. We did not talk about revenge. We did not talk about my past marriage. I never spoke badly about his father figures or my ex-husband. I did not want bitterness shaping his future. I wanted clarity to do that. The past stayed where it belonged, behind us, untouched, not forgotten, but not fed either. There were setbacks, times when money ran out before the month did, times when exhaustion felt heavier than hope, times when he asked questions I could not answer right away. I learned that honesty mattered more than certainty. When I did not know something, I said so. That built trust stronger than pretending to have all the answers. As he grew older, opportunities appeared slowly: scholarships, mentors, programs that noticed his discipline. None of it came easily. He earned every step. I supported him by staying steady, by never doubting him out loud, by reminding him that progress was not a straight line. People around us had no idea what was forming. To them, we were ordinary, invisible, a woman who had fallen and a boy with no background. That anonymity protected us. No one interfered. No one expected anything. That freedom allowed him to grow without pressure or labels. I learned to step back when needed, to let him make mistakes, to let him struggle through problems instead of fixing them for him. That was not easy. After losing so much control in my own life, letting go again felt risky. But growth requires space. I trusted the foundation we had built. Years passed like this, slowly, purposefully. The pain from my past softened, not because it was resolved, but because it was no longer central. I did not measure my worth by who left me anymore. I measured it by what I was building now. He began working early, small jobs at first, then internships, then opportunities that required discipline and long hours. He handled them without complaint. I watched him become reliable, grounded, focused, the kind of person who keeps promises to himself. We did not celebrate milestones loudly. When he achieved something, we acknowledged it and moved forward. Pride was quiet in our home. It did not need to announce itself. We both understood what it had cost to get there. During those years, I never reached out to my ex-husband. I never checked on his life. I did not need to. My energy was invested elsewhere. Revenge did not motivate me. Survival had already been replaced by purpose. That was enough. Looking back, those quiet years were the most important. They shaped who we became. They built discipline, patience, and strength that could not be shaken later. Success was not visible yet, but it was inevitable. It was growing underground, unseen, steady, and unstoppable. The day he returned did not arrive with warning. There was no phone call ahead of time, no message asking permission, no dramatic build-up. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind that passes quietly when life has finally learned how to breathe again. I was sitting near the window, folding laundry, thinking about nothing in particular. Peace had become routine by then. That alone felt like a miracle. Then I noticed the car. It did not belong in our neighborhood. It was too clean, too new, too deliberate. It stopped in front of the building like it had chosen the spot carefully. The engine stayed running for a moment, as if whoever was inside needed time to prepare. I remember feeling curious, not afraid. Curiosity was a luxury I had not always had. The door opened, and a man stepped out. At first, I did not recognize him. He was tall, confident, dressed simply but with intention. There was no show, no excess, but everything about him suggested control. He moved slowly, aware of his surroundings, not rushed, not uncertain. I watched him walk toward the door, and something in my chest shifted before my mind could explain why. When he looked up and our eyes met through the glass, I knew. Time did something strange in that moment. The years collapsed. The boy with the thin jacket and quiet eyes stood right in front of me, layered beneath the man he had become. The weight of all those silent years pressed into a single breath. He knocked once. I opened the door, and neither of us spoke right away. There was no need. His expression softened, not with pride, but with recognition. He did not look like someone returning to prove anything. He looked like someone coming home. He stepped inside, and the space felt different immediately, not because of him, but because of what his presence represented. Everything we had endured, everything we had built quietly, stood in that room with us. I noticed how careful he was. He did not take over the space. He did not assume anything. He waited for me to sit before he sat. He waited for permission in small ways. That told me more than any success ever could. Only then did I understand the full shift that had taken place. Power had changed hands long before that day. It had shifted the moment he learned to stand on his own values instead of chasing approval. It had shifted when survival turned into discipline, and discipline turned into mastery. The world outside would later label him with words like success, influence, and wealth, but inside that room, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he had returned with clarity, with gratitude, with loyalty that had not been demanded, only earned. I saw it in how he looked at me, not like someone rescuing another, but like someone honoring the person who stood beside him when there was nothing to gain. He told me about his life in simple terms, not numbers, not achievements, just choices, risks taken carefully, lessons learned the hard way, people who doubted him, people who underestimated him. He spoke without bitterness, without the need to compare. That told me he had already won. Only later did I understand what his return meant to others. My ex-husband heard about it through whispers, through articles, through names he could no longer ignore. He saw the success from a distance, like someone watching a locked door they once closed themselves. There was no confrontation, no scene, no explanation offered. The power shift did not require words. The man who once dismissed me as disposable now lived with the weight of that decision, not because I demanded it, but because life had delivered it quietly, fairly, and without mercy. What struck me most was how little revenge mattered in that moment. I felt no triumph, no satisfaction, just closure. The kind that arrives when you realize you no longer need validation from people who failed you. He did not come back to change my past. He came back to stand in the present we had earned together. And that was more powerful than any apology or recognition ever could be. That day did not announce itself to the world, but everything changed after it. The boy I saved returned as a man who had outgrown the very people who once believed he would never matter. And standing there, in that quiet room, I understood something clearly for the first time. The greatest power shift is not when others see your worth. It is when you stop needing them to. The consequences did not arrive loudly. There was no argument, no confrontation, no moment where anyone demanded answers. What happened next unfolded the way real consequences often do, slowly, quietly, and in full view of the people who least wanted to see them. My ex-husband learned the truth the same way most people like him do. Not from me, not from a conversation, but from the world around him changing tone. Names he once ignored started appearing in places he could not avoid. News articles, business features, quiet mentions in conversations where his own name no longer carried weight. The success was undeniable, and worse for him, it had nothing to do with him. I never reached out. I never corrected the story. I never explained my choices. I had learned long ago that explaining yourself to someone who already decided your worth is a waste of breath. Silence does more work than arguments ever could. From what I later heard, regret followed him closely. Not the healthy kind that leads to growth, but the bitter kind that asks, "What if?" instead of, "Why did I do this?" He spoke about timing, about luck, about bad decisions. He never spoke about character. People like him rarely do. What mattered to me was not his regret, but the clarity it brought. For years, I had questioned myself. I wondered if I had stayed too long, if I had endured too much, if leaving sooner would have saved parts of me that never fully healed. Watching the truth reveal itself without my involvement gave me peace I did not expect. There was also the quiet realization that success exposes everyone differently. Some people shine under it, others shrink. My ex-husband did not shrink because of money or status. He shrank because the lie he built his confidence on had collapsed. The lie that he was the one who mattered. The lie that I was replaceable. The lie that kindness was weakness. I saw the contrast clearly in the man sitting across from me, the boy I raised, now grown, grounded, and unafraid of humility. He did not speak about revenge. He did not ask how it felt to be proven right. He did not need to. His presence alone answered every question. That was when I understood the deepest consequence of all. I had not lost anything by being discarded. I had been freed from a story that was never written in my favor. The people who dismissed me had not taken power from me. They had simply removed themselves from my future. The truth revealed itself without confrontation, without cruelty, without effort on my part. And that is what made it final. I did not need apologies. I did not need acknowledgement. I did not need my pain validated by the same people who caused it. Life had already done that work for me, quietly, thoroughly. There was a strange relief in knowing that I no longer needed to prove anything, not my sacrifice, not my endurance, not my worth. The proof was walking, breathing, and sitting in front of me, not as a trophy, but as a living reminder that choosing compassion over bitterness does not make you small. It makes you lasting. What my ex-husband lost was not just access to a future he could have shared. He lost the right to rewrite the past in his favor. The story no longer belonged to him. It never truly had. And I learned something important in that season of closure. Consequences do not always come as punishment. Sometimes they arrive as understanding. Sometimes they arrive as distance. Sometimes they arrive as watching someone live the life they once denied you, without needing them at all. That was the real ending of that chapter. Not with anger, not with triumph, but with certainty. The truth had spoken, and it did not need my voice to be heard. Healing did not arrive all at once. It came quietly, in ordinary moments that slowly added up to something solid and real. It showed up in the mornings when I woke up without fear of being dismissed. It appeared in the evenings when the house felt calm instead of tense. It settled into my body the day I realized I no longer replayed old conversations in my head, no longer wondered what I could have done differently to deserve better treatment. I finally understood that what happened to me was never about my worth. It was about someone else's limits. Life with my son, the boy I adopted when I had nothing, became simple in the best way. We did not live in excess. We lived with intention. Every decision was thoughtful. Every success was grounded. There was no need to prove anything to anyone. We built routines that felt safe, shared meals, quiet talks, mutual respect. These were things I had once begged for silently in my marriage, and now they existed without effort. What surprised me most was how peace felt unfamiliar at first. I had spent so many years bracing myself for disappointment that calm felt almost suspicious. But over time, my nervous system softened. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped explaining my choices. I stopped shrinking to make others comfortable. Healing, I learned, is not dramatic. It is steady. It is boring. It is deeply powerful. I also learned to forgive, not in the way people expect, but in the way that frees you. I did not forgive to reopen doors. I forgave to close them without bitterness. I did not forget what was done to me. I simply refused to carry it forward. Forgiveness became a boundary, not a reconciliation. As years passed, I watched my son carry himself with integrity. His success never changed how he treated people. That was the true reward. Not wealth, not recognition, but character. I saw in him everything I had once hoped marriage would give me: partnership, loyalty, and mutual care. And I realized that family is not defined by blood or paperwork. It is defined by who stays when life strips everything away. The moral of my story is not about revenge. It is not about proving anyone wrong. It is about understanding that being underestimated can become a gift. When people believe you are small, they stop watching. And when they stop watching, you are free to grow in any direction you choose. I learned that silence can be survival, but it should never be permanent. There comes a time when choosing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. I waited too long to do that, but I am grateful I eventually did. Not everyone gets that chance. If there is one truth I hold on to now, it is this: love should never require you to disappear. Marriage should not demand you abandon your dreams. Family should not make you feel replaceable. And if any relationship asks you to become smaller to keep it alive, it is already dead. Today, I live without regret. I live without resentment. I live with clarity. I know who I am. I know what I survived. And I know what I built from the ashes of being discarded. I did not win because someone else failed. I won because I chose love when bitterness would have been easier. I chose patience when anger was tempting. And most of all, I chose myself when the world told me I was not worth choosing. Sometimes the family you lose makes room for the family you were meant to find. And sometimes the greatest lesson is this: the quiet woman everyone ignored was never weak. She was simply waiting for the right moment to live.